It was supposed to be a routine departure for Flight 882 to Zurich, but the silence that just fell over JFK Airport wasn't mechanical failure. It wasn't weather. It was the sound of one man, David Stirling, deciding he had seen enough. 10 minutes ago, a flight attendant named Brenda Holloway dragged a 10-year-old girl out of her first-class seat because she didn't believe a child like her could afford the ticket. She didn't know the girl's father was the man who supplies the fuel for every plane on the tarmac. This is the story of the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The early morning sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of JFK's Terminal 4, casting long golden shadows across the polished terrazzo floors. It was 7:15 a.m., the golden hour for international business travel. Men in Italian suits checked Rolexes, and women in cashmere wraps sipped espresso, all waiting for Regal Air Flight 882 to Zurich. Among the sea of grey and navy suits, 10-year-old Chloe Stirling stood out like a splash of paint on a blank canvas. She was wearing a slightly oversized, bright yellow hoodie, faded denim overalls, and scuffed pink Converse sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in two puffy afro puffs that bounced slightly with every step she took. She clutched a worn-out, one-eyed teddy bear named Mr. Biscuits to her chest with one arm, while her other hand tightly gripped a first-class boarding pass. She looked entirely too comfortable, and to some people, that was a problem. David Stirling, her father, was lagging about 20 feet behind her. He was on a call, his voice low and calm. David didn't look like the kind of man who owned half the logistics supply chain on the East Coast. He was dressed in a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, looking more like an off-duty mechanic than a billionaire CEO. He gave Chloe a thumbs up as she approached the gate agent, signaling her to go ahead. Chloe beamed. This was her first solo walk down the jet bridge. She loved planes. She loved the smell of the cabin, the hum of the air conditioning, the way the world looked like a patchwork quilt from the sky. She approached the gate. The scanner beeped a pleasant green. She skipped down the jet bridge, her heart fluttering with excitement. She found the door to the aircraft and turned left toward the first-class cabin. Standing at the entrance of the galley was Brenda Holloway. Brenda had been flying with Regal Air for 22 years. She wore her uniform not just as clothing, but as armor. Her lipstick was a severe shade of crimson. Her blonde hair was lacquered into an immovable helmet, and her patience had eroded decades ago. To Brenda, first class was a sanctuary for the elite, which in her mind meant quiet, older, and wealthy. She was currently rearranging a stack of linen napkins when she saw the yellow hoodie enter her peripheral vision. Brenda didn't look up immediately. She assumed the child had taken a wrong turn. "Economy is to the right, sweetie," Brenda said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condensation. She pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the plane without making eye contact. Chloe paused, looking at her ticket. "Oh no, ma'am. I'm in 1A. Brenda stopped. She slowly turned her head. Her eyes swept over Chloe, the scuffed sneakers, the puffs, the worn-out bear. A sneer tugged at the corner of her mouth. 1A. Brenda repeated, her tone hardening. "Let me see that." Chloe held out the boarding pass. Brenda snatched it from her hand, her eyes scanning the paper as if looking for a forgery. It was legitimate. Chloe Stirling, seat 1A, first class. Brenda frowned. System error, she thought, or an upgrade mistake. "Where are your parents?" Brenda demanded, looking past Chloe into the empty jet bridge. "My dad is coming. He's just finishing a call," Chloe said softly. Her smile was fading. She sensed the hostility radiating off the woman like heat from a pavement. "Well, you can't block the aisle," Brenda snapped. "Stand over there." She gestured to a cramped corner near the cockpit door. As Chloe moved out of the way, clutching Mr. Biscuits tighter, another passenger boarded. Beatrice Wellington. Beatrice was a woman who wore her wealth like a weapon. She was draped in a fur-lined coat despite it being May, and carried a Louis Vuitton bag that cost more than most cars. She stopped when she saw Chloe standing near the first-class pods. "Brenda." Beatrice sighed, sounding exhausted already. "Why is there a unattended child in the cabin? I thought I paid for exclusivity, not a daycare." Brenda's posture straightened immediately. She flashed a dazzling, apologetic smile at Beatrice. "My apologies, Mrs. Wellington. We're just sorting out a ticketing error. It will be resolved momentarily. Please take your seat in 2A. Can I get you a glass of champagne?" "Make it a double," Beatrice muttered, side-eyeing Chloe with blatant disgust as she squeezed past. "And do try to keep the riffraff out of here." Chloe shrank back. She wasn't riffraff. She was just Chloe. The cabin was filling up. Businessmen were stowing briefcases. The air was filling with the scent of expensive perfume and leather. But the tension in the front galley was thick enough to choke on. Brenda turned back to Chloe, her fake smile for Beatrice vanishing instantly. "Listen to me," Brenda said, leaning down so her face was inches from Chloe's. "I don't know how you got this ticket. Maybe your daddy used miles. Maybe the computer made a mistake. But seat 1A is reserved for full-fare paying customers. VIPs. My dad bought it," Chloe whispered. Tears were prickling the corners of her eyes. "He said we're going to Switzerland for chocolate." Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh. "Right. Switzerland for chocolate. Look, kid, I don't have time for fairy tales. This seat," she pointed to the plush leather pod that was seat 1A, "costs $15,000. Does your dad look like he has $15,000? Chloe thought about her dad. He wore T-shirts. He drove an old Ford truck on weekends because he liked how it felt. I don't know." "Exactly," Brenda said triumphantly. She felt she had cracked the case. It was a classic scam. Buy a cheap economy ticket, Photoshop a first-class pass, and hope the flight attendants are too busy to notice. Well, not Brenda Halloway, not on her watch. "Here is what we are going to do," Brenda said, grabbing Chloe's small arm. Her grip was tight. Too tight. "You are going to go back to economy row 42, where there are open seats. When your father gets here, I'll have a little chat with him about fraud." "But my dad is—" "Quiet," Brenda hissed. Just then David Sterling stepped onto the plane. He was still looking at his phone, typing a final email. He looked up, expecting to see Chloe settled in her seat with her headphones on. Instead, he saw her backed into a corner by the cockpit, looking terrified with the flight attendant looming over her. David slipped his phone into his pocket. His demeanor shifted instantly. The relaxed off-duty dad vanished. In his place was the man who negotiated contracts with nations. He walked forward, his steps silent but heavy. "Is there a problem here?" David asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that cut through the cabin chatter. Brenda spun around. She took in David's appearance, the plain T-shirt, the jeans, the lack of a designer watch. She mentally categorized him. Nobody. "Yes, there is a problem," Brenda said, crossing her arms. "I caught your daughter trying to sneak into first class. I'm going to need to see your actual boarding passes, the real ones, not the ones you printed off the internet." David blinked, genuinely confused for a microsecond. Then his eyes narrowed. He looked at Chloe, who was wiping a tear from her cheek. "It's okay, Chloe," David said softly. He turned his gaze back to Brenda. It was cold calculating. "These are valid tickets, ma'am. Chloe is in 1A. I am in 1B. "Don't lie to me," Brenda scoffed. She looked around for support and found Beatrice Wellington watching the scene with amusement over the rim of her champagne flute. "Sir, let's be real. People like you don't sit in 1A. Now I can call security and have you escorted off for attempted theft of services, or you can take your daughter and move to the back of the plane right now." David stood very still. "People like me," he repeated. "You know what I mean," Brenda said, her voice dripping with prejudice. "We have high-value clients on this flight. We can't have disruptions." "I see," David said. He reached into his pocket. "Don't you dare pull out a weapon!" Brenda shrieked, jumping back. The cabin went silent. Every head turned. David slowly pulled out his wallet. He extracted a black titanium card, the kind that has no limit, the kind you have to be invited to own. He also pulled out his ID. "I was going to show you my ID," David said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "But I don't think you're interested in who I am. You've already decided who I am." "I'm interested in you moving," Brenda snapped. "Now, or I call the pilot." "Call him," David challenged. The standoff lasted 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Beatrice Wellington let out a loud, theatrical groan. "Oh, for heaven's sake, can we just get this over with? Some of us have meetings in Zurich. Get them off the plane." Empowered by the wealthy passenger's support, Brenda made her move. She reached for the intercom. "Captain, we have a security situation in the forward cabin. Non-compliant passengers refusing to vacate premium seats." A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Richard O'Malley stepped out. He was a tall man, stressed, already running 10 minutes behind schedule due to a catering mix-up. He saw the scene: a crying child, a defiant-looking man in a t-shirt, and his lead flight attendant looking flustered. "What's going on?" O'Malley asked. "They have fake tickets, Captain," Brenda lied smoothly. "And he's becoming aggressive." He reached into his pocket in a threatening manner. Captain O'Malley looked at David. He didn't recognize him. David Sterling rarely flew commercial. He usually took his private Gulfstream, but the jet was in maintenance, and he had promised Chloe the big plane experience. "Sir," the captain said, his voice weary, "I'm going to have to ask you to grab your bags and step off the aircraft. We can sort this out at the gate, but I can't fly with a disturbance on board." "I bought these tickets," David said calmly. "You can check the manifest." "The manifest says Sterling," Brenda interjected quickly. "This man clearly isn't a Sterling. Look at him." The racism was so casual, so naked, that David actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Captain," David said, ignoring Brenda and looking O'Malley in the eye. "If I walk off this plane does not take off. I promise you that." Captain O'Malley sighed. He'd heard threats like this 1,000 times. "Sir, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Federal marshals are just up the jet bridge." David looked at Chloe. She was trembling. This was supposed to be a fun trip. He wasn't going to let her see her father get dragged away in handcuffs. He needed to change the battlefield. "Fine," David said. He picked up Chloe's backpack. "Come on, Chloe." "But Dad," Chloe sniffled. "Did we do something wrong?" David crouched down, ignoring the glare of Beatrice Wellington and the smug look on Brenda's face. "No, baby, we didn't. But these people are about to learn a very hard lesson about manners. Let's go." David took Chloe's hand. He walked past Brenda, stopping for just a fraction of a second. "What's your full name?" he asked. "Brenda Holloway," she said, tapping her name tag. "Make sure you spell it right in your complaint letter. Customer service deletes them anyway." David nodded. I won't be writing a letter, Brenda. He walked off the plane. As they stepped back into the jet bridge, the heavy aircraft door slammed shut behind them with a definitive thud. Inside the plane, Brenda let out a breath and smoothed her skirt. "Finally," she said to Beatrice. "So sorry about that, Mrs. Wellington. Some people just don't know their place." "Quite right," Beatrice replied, settling back into her seat. "More champagne, dear." Outside in the terminal, the air was cool. David didn't go to the customer service desk. He didn't go to the ticket counter. He found a quiet row of seats near the window where he could see the nose of the Regal Air plane. He sat Chloe down. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Okay, watch the plane." David pulled out his phone. He didn't dial the airline. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a number saved simply as Victor, Port Authority Fuel Logistics. He hit dial. "Dave," a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "I thought you were on vacation. You in the air?" "Not exactly," David said, his eyes fixed on the plane where Brenda was likely pouring champagne. "Victor, listen to me carefully. I'm invoking the Clause 4 safety audit on the fuel lines for the Northeast Corridor, effective immediately." Clause 4. Victor's voice rose. "Dave, are you crazy? That freezes the pumps, that stops everything. We're talking millions in delays. The airport will grind to a halt." "I know," David said, "but I have reason to believe Regal Air isn't vetting their operations properly. If their staff is incompetent, I can't trust them with my fuel. Shut it down, Victor. Shut it all down. Specifically the hydrants feeding Terminal 4. "It's your company, boss," Victor said hesitantly. "But the FAA is gonna scream." "Let them scream," David said, "and Victor revoke the credit line for Regal Air's refueling account. Flag it for executive review." "Understood. Initiating lockdown in 3, 2, 1. David hung up. He put his arm around Chloe. "Watch the engines, sweetie," he said. Out on the tarmac, Flight 882 had just pushed back. The engines were spooling up a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the glass. Then suddenly the whine dropped in pitch. Then it sputtered. Then silence. The fuel flow had been cut. Inside Regal Air Flight 882, the silence was deafening. The hum of the air circulation systems, the low thrum of the idling engines, the white noise that passengers took for granted, it had all vanished instantly. Captain Richard O'Malley frowned, tapping the fuel pressure gauge. It was reading 0. Not low. 0. "Tower, this is Regal 882. He keyed the radio, his voice tinged with confusion. "We just lost fuel pressure on both engines, requesting a tug back to the gate. Did the truck disconnect early?" "Negative, Regal 882, the tower controller replied, sounding equally perplexed. "The truck is still attached. We're seeing... Stand by." There was a long pause. "Captain Ground is reporting that the hydrant pumps have stopped, not just for you, for the whole terminal." In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere shifted from smug satisfaction to irritation within minutes. Without the engines running, the auxiliary power unit APU struggled to keep the heavy electrical load of the massive aircraft going. The lights flickered. The in-flight entertainment screens went black. And most critically, the air conditioning vents stopped blowing cold air. Brenda Halloway was in the galley, furiously trying to get the intercom to work. She smoothed her hair, forcing a smile onto her face, though beads of sweat were already forming on her upper lip. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet cabin. "We are experiencing a minor technical difficulty with the ground equipment. The captain is sorting it out. We should be underway in just a moment. In the meantime, please remain seated. It's getting stifling in here." Beatrice Wellington complained from seat 2A. She fanned herself with the laminated safety card. "Brenda, I need another champagne. And ice. Lots of ice." "Of course, Mrs. Wellington," Brenda said, rushing to the cooler. But when she opened it, she realized the chilling unit had powered down. The ice was melting. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The sun beating down on the aluminum fuselage began to turn the aircraft into a greenhouse. The temperature in the cabin climbed to 80 degrees. Babies in economy started to cry. The businessmen in business class loosened their ties, their faces growing red. Brenda walked down the aisle, trying to avoid eye contact. She felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. This wasn't normal. A fuel truck didn't just stop. Captain O'Malley opened the cockpit door. His face flushed. He grabbed the service interphone. "Brenda, tell the passengers we're deplaning. The fuel company has cut the line. They're refusing to pump." "Refusing?" Brenda whispered. "Why, I don't know." O'Malley snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Dispatch says there's a level 1 executive hold on the account. I've never seen that code before. We're dead in the water." Brenda felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She looked out the porthole window. She could see the terminal building just 100 feet away. And there, sitting calmly in the waiting area, watching the plane like a hawk, was the man in the black t-shirt. He hadn't left. He was watching them cook. "No," Brenda muttered to herself. "It's a coincidence. He's nobody. He's just a thug who stole a credit card." But as the heat rose and the smell of stagnant air and frustration filled the first-class cabin, the image of David Sterling's cold, dark eyes haunted her. "Brenda!" Beatrice shouted, her voice shrill. "This is unacceptable. I am a platinum member. Get the pilot to fix this." I can't, ma'am." Brenda stammered, her composure cracking. "The fuel. It's gone." "Well, get 'em more. We can't," Brenda yelled back, shocking herself. The stress was breaking her. "Nobody can get any fuel. The airport is shutting down." 3 miles away, in the glass-walled operations center of JFK Airport, chaos reigned. Arthur Pendergast, the director of operations for the entire airport, was a man who lived by schedules and efficiency. He was currently screaming into a telephone. "What do you mean the pumps are locked out?" Pendergast roared, his face turning a shade of purple. "We have 40 aircraft on the tarmac. We have inbound flights from London and Tokyo that will run out of fuel if they enter a holding pattern. Turn the valves back on." On the other end of the line was the regional manager for the fuel supply company. He sounded terrified. "I can't, Mr. Pendergast. The system is hard-locked from the mainframe. It's a Clause 4 shutdown. It overrides everything. Manual overrides are disabled." "Who authorized a Clause 4? Pendergast demanded. "That's for catastrophic infrastructure failure. Is there a leak? Is there a bomb?" "No, sir. It was authorized by the chairman." Pendergast froze. "The chairman? Which chairman?" "The chairman of Sterling Energy Logistics, the owner of the pipeline, David Sterling. He initiated the kill switch personally via his biometric code." Pendergast dropped into his leather chair. Sterling Energy supplied 80% of the aviation fuel for the eastern seaboard. If David Sterling wanted to, he could ground the entire coast. "Get me Sterling on the phone," Pendergast barked to his assistant. "Now." We can't reach his office, sir," the assistant said, typing furiously. "But, sir, you might want to look at this." "What?" The assistant spun a monitor around. It displayed a security alert from Terminal 4. "I was running a trace on the lockout code. The GPS signal for the authorization didn't come from the corporate headquarters in Manhattan. It came from inside the airport. Terminal 4, Gate B12. Pendergast blinked. "He's here. And, sir," the assistant continued, his voice trembling, "I pulled the manifest for the flight sitting at BT-12, Regal Air Flight 882. Look at seats 1A and 1B. Pendergast squinted at the screen. 1A Sterling Chloe. 1B Sterling David. Status offloaded by crew. Security risk. The color drained from Pendergast's face. He felt like he was going to vomit. "Regal Air," he whispered. "Those idiots! They kicked David Sterling off his own fuel supply." "It gets worse," the assistant said, reading the incident report filed by the gate agent. The notes say the lead flight attendant, Brenda Holloway, deemed the passengers financially ineligible for first class and suspected fraudulent ticketing. She removed them to make room for a standby upgrade. Pendergast stood up slowly. He adjusted his tie. He was trembling with rage. A flight attendant had just cost the airport millions of dollars per minute because she judged a billionaire by his T-shirt. "Get the car," Pendergast said, his voice deadly quiet. "Sir, get the car. We are going to Gate B12 and tell Regal Air's CEO that if he wants his planes to ever fly again, he needs to get his pilot and that flight attendant off that plane and onto the jet bridge in 5 minutes. I want their heads on a platter." The atmosphere at Gate B12 had shifted from impatient irritation to a heavy, suffocating dread. The air conditioning in the terminal was humming, but for the passengers of Flight 882, the temperature was rising emotionally. David Sterling hadn't moved. He sat on the black vinyl waiting chairs, his posture relaxed but immovable, like a stone statue in a garden of chaos. Chloe was asleep, her head resting heavily on his left thigh. Her breathing was rhythmic and soft, a stark contrast to the frenzy erupting around them. One of her hands still clutched the strap of her backpack, and the other held on to Mr. Biscuits. David looked down at her. He brushed a stray puff of hair from her forehead. His anger wasn't a hot, fiery thing anymore. It had cooled into something much more dangerous, absolute resolve. He wasn't doing this for his ego. He was doing this so that 10 years from now, when Chloe walked into a boardroom or onto a plane, she wouldn't hesitate to take the seat she deserved. He checked his phone. It was flooded with missed calls from his COO, his legal team, and 3 different news outlets. He ignored them all. He was waiting for one specific face. A commotion at the far end of the terminal concourse broke his focus. The double doors near the security checkpoint burst open. Arthur Pendergast, the director of operations for JFK, was running. He was a man not built for speed, heavy-set, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and currently sweating profusely. His face was a mask of sheer panic. Flanking him were 4 large airport police officers, their hands resting on their belts. And behind them, looking like prisoners on a death march, were Captain Richard O'Malley and Brenda Holloway. Brenda looked nothing like the tyrant who had commanded the first-class cabin an hour ago. The humidity of the depowered plane had destroyed her immaculate appearance. Her hair, usually sprayed into a golden helmet, was frizzing at the temples. Her scarf was askew. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath her left eye, giving her a bruised, hollow look. She walked with jerky, nervous steps, her eyes darting around the terminal, avoiding the gaze of the passengers she had abandoned. Captain O'Malley looked worse. He was pale, his pilot's hat held in his hands, his knuckles white. He knew the chain of command. He knew that when the fuel stops, the money stops. And when the money stops, the pilot takes the fall. The group practically skidded to a halt in front of the seating area, where David waited. The silence that fell over Gate B12 was instant. The angry murmurs of the stranded passengers, the businessmen, the vacationing families. Even Beatrice Wellington ceased. Everyone sensed the shift in power. The man in the t-shirt wasn't a passenger anymore. He was the judge. Pendergast arrived first, bending over to catch his breath, his hands on his knees. He looked up at David, his eyes wide with desperation. "Mr. Sterling," Pendergast wheezed, straightening up and wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Mr. Sterling, I am Arthur Pendergast, Director of Airport Operations. I got here as fast as I could." David didn't stand up. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at Pendergast, then slowly moved his gaze to the two people behind him. "You have a nice airport director," David said, his voice low, barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the silent gate area like a gunshot. "It's a shame nothing is moving." We are in a critical state, sir," Pendergast stammered. "The fuel freeze. It's affecting everything. The cargo lines are backed up to New Jersey. The medical transports are grounded. We have incoming flights from Tokyo and London that are going to have to divert to Boston if we don't get the pumps on in 10 minutes. I'm begging you, what do we need to do?" David carefully shifted his leg so as not to wake Chloe. He stood up slowly, unfolding his height. He wasn't an intimidatingly large man, but the way he held himself made him seem 10 feet tall. "I don't need you to fix the airport director," David said. "The airport is fine. The machinery works. The problem is the people operating it." He took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and Brenda. Brenda flinched. She took a half step back, bumping into one of the police officers. She looked at David, and for the first time she truly saw him. She saw the jawline that was set like granite. She saw the eyes that held no mercy. She realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach that the scruffy dad she had mocked was a shark, and she was in deep water. "That woman," David said, pointing a finger at Brenda. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "She looked at my daughter, my 10-year-old child, and decided she was a fraud. She decided we were criminals because we didn't fit her profile of what first class looks like." He turned to the crowd of passengers. "She asked me if I could afford the seat," David said to the room. "She asked me if I knew what people like me do." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Beatrice Wellington, standing near the counter with her Louis Vuitton bag, covered her mouth with her hand. Even she, with her snobbery, knew there were lines you didn't cross. Brenda's lips trembled. I didn't mean... You didn't mean for me to be who I am." David cut her off. "You gambled that I was nobody. You gambled that you could bully a child and get away with it because you had a badge and a uniform. Well, you lost." David turned back to Pendergast. The air around them felt electric. "People like me," David said, his voice hardening into steel, "supply the kerosene that keeps your job in existence. People like me build the infrastructure that lets you fly. And people like me don't like bullies." He held out his hand, palm up. "I want her badge," David commanded. "Right now." The silence stretched for a painful second. Brenda's eyes widened in horror. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't." Pendergast didn't hesitate. He turned to the security officers. "Officer, remove Ms. Halloway's credentials. She is relieved of duty." "You can't do this," Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. "I have 22 years, I have seniority. You can't fire me on the spot because of him." "I'm not firing you, Brenda," Pendergast said coldly. "I'm revoking your security clearance for the airfield. You are a liability to the operation of John F. Kennedy International Airport. Hand it over." One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, the badge." Brenda clutched her lanyard. "Captain," she pleaded, turning to O'Malley. "Richard, tell them we were following protocol. You agreed with me. You said they were a risk." Captain O'Malley stepped back, putting distance between himself and the sinking ship. He looked at David Sterling, then at the furious director of operations. He shook his head. "You lied to me, Brenda," O'Malley said, his voice trembling but distinct. "You told me they were aggressive. You told me they refused to show tickets. You told me he reached for a weapon. I acted on your information. This is on you." "I didn't lie." Brenda sobbed, tears finally spilling over, ruining the last of her makeup. "He looked like a thug. Look at him. He's wearing a t-shirt." The crowd gasped again. Even in her demise, she couldn't stop the prejudice from spilling out. David laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "A t-shirt," he repeated. "That's your defense." The officer didn't wait any longer. He reached out and unclipped the lanyard from Brenda's neck. He pulled it free. Brenda grabbed for it, missing. "Please, Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry, I have a mortgage. I'm a single income. Please, I was just having a bad day." David leaned in close. His voice dropped, so only she could hear it. "My daughter was having a great day," he said softly. It was her first time flying alone in the front. She wore her favorite yellow hoodie. She brought her bear. She was going to see the Alps. You took that day, and you turned it into a memory of shame. You made her feel small, so you could feel big. I don't care about your mortgage, Brenda. I care about her dignity." David straightened up and nodded to the officers. "Get her out of my sight." Two officers took Brenda by the arms. As they began to march her away, her sobbing echoed off the high ceilings of the terminal. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "It isn't fair." As she was dragged past the seating area, something remarkable happened. A young man in a business suit, one of the passengers who had been sweating in the heat, started to clap. Then a mother holding a baby joined in. Then the gate agent. Within seconds, the entire gate area was applauding. It wasn't a celebration of cruelty. It was a release. They had all been held hostage by her arrogance, and seeing justice served so swiftly, so absolutely, was cathartic. David didn't watch her go. He turned his attention to the captain. O'Malley was shaking. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. "And him?" David asked Pendergast. "Suspended pending a full NTSB and internal investigation." Pendergast promised quickly. "He'll be grounded until the review board clears him, which given the circumstances is unlikely to happen soon." "Good," David said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Pendergast stared at the phone as if it were a bomb detonator. David dialed. "Victor." "I'm here, boss." The voice on the other end crackled. "Things are getting crazy. The governor is calling." "Turn it back on," David said simply. "Open the valves. Full flow." "Copy that. Resetting systems now." David hung up. Almost instantly, the tension in the room broke. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the flashing red lights on the fuel trucks turned to a steady amber, then green. The distant hum of pumps springing to life vibrated through the floor. Pendergast slumped, letting out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a lifetime. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Thank you." David walked back to the seats and gently shook Chloe's shoulder. "Hey, sleepyhead," he whispered. Chloe rubbed her eyes, blinking against the terminal lights. She sat up, clutching Mr. Biscuits. She looked around, confused. "Daddy? Did we miss the plane?" "No, baby," David said, smoothing her hair. "We just decided to take a different one." "Is that lady still mad at us?" Chloe asked, looking around fearfully for Brenda. David smiled a genuine, warm smile this time. "No, that lady had to go home early. She won't be bothering us again." David stood up, lifting Chloe's backpack. He turned to Pendergast. "Director, my private jet is in maintenance. That's why we were flying commercial today. Clearly that was a mistake." Pendergast nodded vigorously. "A terrible mistake, sir. We will ensure Regal Air refunds your tickets immediately." "Keep the refund," David said dismissively. "I need a plane, now. I promised my daughter chocolate in Zurich, and we are already running 2 hours late." Pendergast whipped out his phone. "I can have a Gulfstream G650 prepped and at the General Aviation Terminal in 20 minutes. It belongs to the CEO of Regal Air, actually. I think he would be more than happy to loan it to you if it means you don't sue him into oblivion." "Tell him it's a start," David said. "I want catering to include fresh cookies and no attitude. Consider it done." As David and Chloe began to walk toward the exit, the crowd of passengers parted for them like the Red Sea. There was no jealousy in their eyes anymore, only respect and a little bit of fear. Just as they reached the corridor, a voice called out, "Miss Sterling." David paused and turned. It was Beatrice Wellington. The wealthy socialite looked smaller than she had before. She was holding her champagne glass, but she wasn't drinking. She looked at Chloe, then at David. The haughtiness was gone, replaced by a nervous humility. Beatrice started, her voice faltering. She looked down at her expensive shoes. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong. About the noise. About everything." She looked at Chloe. "You have a very well-behaved daughter," Beatrice said quietly. "She didn't deserve that." David studied her face. He saw the genuine embarrassment there. He knew he could crush her too. He could ban her from his company's charity galas. He could have her blacklisted from events. But he saw no point. Brenda had been the aggressor. Beatrice had just been a follower. "Ms. Wellington," David said evenly, "next time you see a little girl with an afro in first class, maybe offer her a smile instead of a judgment. You never know who she might grow up to be." Beatrice nodded, her face flushing pink. "I will. I promise." "Come on, Dad." Chloe tugged on his hand. "I'm hungry." "Let's go, kiddo," David said. They walked away down the long, sunlit concourse of Terminal 4, leaving behind a baffled director, a terrified captain, and a terminal full of people who had just learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. David didn't look back. He had a plane to catch. And this time, he knew the crew would treat Chloe like the royalty she was. The Bombardier Global 7500, the replacement jet provided by the panicked CEO of Regal Air, was a different world compared to the commercial first-class cabin. The interior was lined with mahogany and cream leather. There were no cramped overhead bins, no judgmental glares, and certainly no Brenda Holloway. As the jet climbed to 45,000 feet, leaving the chaos of JFK far below, David Sterling finally relaxed. He watched Chloe across the aisle. She was happily eating a warm chocolate chip cookie that a private flight attendant named Sarah had baked fresh in the galley oven. "Is this better, Chloe?" David asked, swirling a glass of sparkling water. Chloe looked up, milk mustache on her upper lip. "It's quiet, Daddy, and nobody is yelling." "No," David said, his eyes darkening slightly as he looked out of the window at the clouds. Nobody is going to yell at you ever again. While the Sterlings flew toward Zurich in luxury, the world below was catching fire. The incident hadn't stayed contained at Gate B12. In the age of smartphones, privacy is a myth. A teenager in Seat 3A, a young tech whiz named Jason Miller, had been filming the entire interaction between Brenda and David from the moment David stepped onto the plane. 10 minutes after David and Chloe walked off the jet bridge, Jason uploaded the video to TikTok and Twitter, with the caption "Flight attendant profiles billionaire and his kid. Gets the whole airport shut down. #karma Sterling /JFK." By the time the Sterlings landed in Switzerland 8 hours later, the video had 45 million views. The public court. The internet did what the internet does best. It became a detective agency and a judge, jury, and executioner all at once. Within hours, Brenda Holloway's name was trending globally. But it wasn't just her name. Internet sleuths had dug up her past. They found old forum posts where she complained about urban passengers. They found complaints filed against her in 2018 and 2021 for similar behavior that Regal Air had swept under the rug. Regal Air's stock price plummeted by 14% before the market closed that day. The #boycott_Regal was the #1 trending topic in the United States, the UK, and Germany. In the corporate headquarters of Regal Air in Chicago, CEO Jonathan Crane was staring at a screen that showed his career evaporating. He had Arthur Pendergast on speakerphone. "You have to fix this, Arthur." Crane was sweating. "Tell the press it was a misunderstanding. Tell them Sterling was aggressive. I can't do that." "Jonathan," Pendergast's voice was icy. "Because I saw it. And more importantly, David Sterling controls the fuel. If I lie for you, he cuts the pipeline permanently. You're on your own. You sacrificed your reputation for a flight attendant who profiled a child. Live with it." Brenda's reality check. Brenda Holloway didn't go home after being escorted out of the airport. She went to a bar near the Howard Beach station. She ordered a vodka tonic, her hands shaking so badly she spilled half of it. She checked her phone. Her inbox was full. Hundreds of messages, some from friends asking if she was okay, but most from strangers. Hateful, angry messages. She deleted her Facebook app. She deleted Instagram. She thought, "It will blow over. It always blows over. The union will save me." The next morning, she was summoned to the Regal Air regional office. She walked in with her head held high, ready to fight. She had her union rep, a tired-looking man named Frank, beside her. "I followed protocol," Brenda stated as she sat across from the HR director. "The passengers looked suspicious. I have the right to protect the aircraft." The HR director didn't say a word. He simply turned a laptop around. It was playing the video Jason Miller had recorded. "Does your dad look like he has $15,000? Brenda's voice rang out from the speakers, tinny and cruel. The HR director paused the video on Chloe's tear-stained face. "Protocol?" the director asked quietly. "Brenda, you asked a 10-year-old girl if her father could afford a seat. That isn't security. That is bias." "I was tired," Brenda snapped. "And he was rude. He is David Sterling," the director said. "Do you know who he is? I don't care who he is. He is the reason we fly, Brenda, and he is the reason you are fired. For cause, effective immediately, no severance, no pension benefits for the current quarter. You are done." Frank, the union rep, closed his notebook. "Brenda, I can't defend this. You're on video. It's indefensible." Brenda stood up, her face turning red. "You can't do this to me. Who will hire me? I'm 50 years old. Flying is all I know." "You should have thought about that before you made a child cry," the director said, looking down at his paperwork. "Please leave your badge on the desk." The downward spiral. The real-life karma hit Brenda harder than the firing. 3 months later, the bills started piling up. She had applied to Delta United American, even the budget carriers like Spirit and Frontier. Every single application was flagged. Her name was on a "Do Not Hire" blacklist shared among airline HR departments, a list usually reserved for terrorists and violent passengers. She lost her condo in Queens. She had to sell her car. One rainy Tuesday in November, Brenda found herself walking into a Big Buy superstore, a generic retail chain. She was applying for a position as a cashier. The manager, a young Hispanic man named Diego, looked at her resume. "You have a lot of experience in customer service," Diego said kindly. 20 years at Regal Air." "Yes," Brenda said, forcing a humble smile. "I retired early. Wanted a slower pace." Diego typed her name into the computer to run a background check. He paused. He clicked a link. He watched the screen for a moment. His face hardened. He looked up at Brenda. The kindness was gone. "I saw this video," Diego said. "My little sister wears her hair in puffs like that." Brenda froze. That was a misunderstanding. The internet edits things." Diego stood up. "We pride ourselves on being a store for everyone, Ms. Halloway. I don't think you'd be a good fit for our culture. Please leave." Brenda walked out into the rain. She had no umbrella. She stood on the curb watching a plane soar overhead, its engines roaring with power. It was a Regal Air jet. She watched it disappear into the clouds, realizing that she would never, ever be in the sky again. She was grounded, permanently. The corporate retribution Regal Air didn't escape unscathed. David Sterling was a man of his word. Upon returning from Switzerland, he filed a civil lawsuit against the airline. But he didn't sue for money. He sued for change. The case, Sterling v. Regal Aviation Group, became a landmark in aviation law. David's team of lawyers, led by the ferocious attorney Robert the Shark Kane, exposed a systemic culture of profiling within the airline's training manuals. During the deposition, the CEO, Jonathan Crane, admitted that they encouraged flight attendants to visually assess financial viability of passengers in upgrades. The verdict was devastating. The court ordered Regal Air to overhaul their entire training program, pay a $50 million fine to civil rights organizations, and most embarrassingly publicly apologize to Chloe Sterling on live television. But David wasn't done. He used his leverage as the fuel supplier to renegotiate his contract with Regal. "Here are the new terms," David told the trembling board of directors in a boardroom in Manhattan. "You will institute a mandatory blind booking review board. Any passenger removed from a premium cabin requires 2 witness signatures and immediate police involvement. No more flight attendants playing God." "Mr. Sterling, this will slow down operations," a board member protested. "Then buy your fuel somewhere else," David said, clicking his pen. "Oh, wait. You can't. I own the pipeline." They signed. 10 years later. Time moves on. But some moments change the trajectory of lives forever. 10 years after the incident, JFK Terminal 4 had changed. It was brighter, more open. And in the center of the main hall stood a new art installation, a bronze statue of a young girl with afro puffs holding a teddy bear, looking up at the sky. The plaque beneath it read, "The Traveler," dedicated to the right of every child to dream without boundaries. Chloe Sterling was now 20 years old. She was a junior at Stanford University, studying aerospace engineering. She didn't just want to ride in planes. She wanted to build them. She wanted to build planes that were faster, cleaner, and accessible to everyone. She walked through the terminal with her father, David. His hair was grayer now, but his eyes were still sharp. "You nervous about the speech?" David asked. "A little," Chloe admitted. She adjusted her blazer. She looked nothing like the scared girl in the yellow hoodie, but she still carried the same spark. They were there for the launch of the Sterling Aviation Scholarship, a fund David had started in Chloe's name. It paid for flight school for underprivileged youth kids who looked like Chloe, who came from neighborhoods that airlines usually flew over, not into. As they walked toward the podium, a woman in a janitor's uniform was pushing a heavy cart of cleaning supplies near the bathrooms. She looked tired, her face lined with premature wrinkles, her back stooped from years of manual labor. It was Brenda. She had been working as a janitor at the airport for 5 years. It was the only job she could get that paid enough to cover her rent in a small basement apartment. Every day, she cleaned the toilets of the first-class lounge she used to manage. Every day, she wiped up the spills of people she used to sneer at. Brenda stopped pushing her cart when she saw the cameras. She saw the crowd. And then she saw him, David Sterling, and the tall, beautiful young woman beside him. Brenda felt a pang of shame so deep it nearly buckled her knees. She wanted to run to hide in the supply closet, but she couldn't look away. She watched as Chloe stepped up to the microphone. "When I was 10 years old," Chloe began, her voice strong and clear, echoing through the terminal. "Someone told me I didn't belong in the front of the plane. They told me my dreams were too expensive for someone like me." Brenda griped the handle of her mop bucket, her knuckles white. "But my father taught me something that day," Chloe continued, looking out at the crowd of aspiring young pilots. "He taught me that your value isn't determined by someone else's narrow view of the world. It's determined by your own altitude. Today we are opening the doors to the cockpit for everyone, because the sky doesn't care how much money you have or what you look like. The sky only cares if you have the courage to fly." The crowd erupted in applause. David beamed, wiping a single tear from his eye. Brenda Holloway stood in the shadows listening to the applause for the girl she had tried to crush. Tears streamed down Brenda's face, hot and bitter. She realized finally the true cost of her arrogance. She had tried to keep Chloe out of first class, but in doing so, she had propelled Chloe to run the whole industry, while Brenda was left to clean up the mess. David turned to leave the stage, and for a brief second, his eyes scanned the perimeter. He saw the janitor. He saw the familiar blonde hair, now dull and graying. He recognized her. He didn't glare. He didn't point. He simply nodded a small, somber acknowledgement of her existence, and then turned his back to walk away with his daughter. It was the ultimate dismissal. She was no longer a threat. She was just a lesson. The real-life connection. While this story is a dramatization, it mirrors a very real turning point in the aviation industry. In recent years, major airlines have faced intense scrutiny regarding profiling and discrimination. The character of David Sterling is inspired by the quiet power of logistics moguls who operate behind the scenes, men and women, who hold the keys to the infrastructure we take for granted. The Clause 4 shutdown mentioned in the story is based on real emergency protocols used by pipeline operators during security breaches, though rarely invoked for personal disputes. However, the Sterling Scholarship is a nod to real organizations like the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, OBAP, and the Fly for the Culture Foundation, which work tirelessly every day to ensure that kids like Chloe, kids with hoodies and big dreams, know that Seat 1A belongs to them just as much as anyone else. The legacy of Flight 882 wasn't the delay. It was the realization that in the modern world, kindness is the most expensive currency of all, and bankruptcy comes quickly to those who refuse to pay it. Brenda Holloway thought she was guarding the gate of the elite, but she ended up locking herself out of her own life. It took one phone call, one father's love, and the courage of a little girl to change the rules of the game. It's a brutal reminder that you never judge a book by its cover or a passenger by their hoodie, because the person you're looking down on today might be the one signing your paycheck or cleaning your clock tomorrow. What would you have done if you were David Sterling? Would you have shut down the airport or handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about karma hitting back. Until next time, keep your seatbelts fastened.